Friend, this is an additional lecture on in one of our series on diabetes. So there was a 10 lecture series, but this is a small module which I thought I should be addressing more about this topic on selective insulin resistance. Why lipogenesis persists despite blunted insulin signaling. So there are many queries, many questions, and I know it's not easy to understand this because our mind works in pathways, and when we see a biochemical reaction in a pathway, we tend to assume that this is what is 100% multi-unifactorial thing going on inside the body, but it doesn't happen like that. So let us try to understand how lipogenesis can even persist when there is a blunted insulin signaling, and basically we know that insulin should promote lipogenesis. So and when there is insulin resistance, it should go down. This is one of the most misunderstood paradoxes in metabolic medicine. So, if insulin signaling itself is blunted at the receptor level itself, and where the buck starts, I should say, the receptor level itself, then how does our liver continues to make fat? And why do patients with insulin resistance, they will have high glucose, high triglycerides and fatty liver and ongoing, even weight gain? Like insulin, if good effective insulin should be responsible for the weight gain, but if there is insulin resistance, then why weight gain? So if insulin action is supposedly reduced, then why all these things? So the answer lies in something called selective insulin resistance. Let us first revisit the physiology of the revisit the physiology of insulin. When insulin binds to its receptor, the insulin receptor autophosphorylates itself, and then this IRS protein are recruited. PI3K converts PIP2 to PIP3, PIP3 recruits AKT, protein kinase B, and AKT becomes activated. From here, insulin signaling splits into two major functional arms in the liver. Till here it is fine. Now two major functional arms. Arm 1, the main arm which we always think of, is glucose control. So AKT inhibits FOXO1, and which suppresses gluconeogenesis genes, and it reduces hepatic glucose production. Arm 2, lipogenesis. AKT activates mTORC1 actually, and it also activates SREBP1C. This is the arm 2, and this increases fatty acids and triglyceride synthesis. So in physiology, insulin suppresses glucose output and promotes fat storage. This is normal fat state metabolism. Understand? This normal fat state, it happens like that. What happens in insulin resistance? So now let us move to metabolic disease. In obesity and chronic hyperinsulinemia, inflammation activates JNK and IKK beta. Lipid intermediates like, as I told you, glycerol, it activates PKC, DHs. Then IRS proteins become serine phosphorylated. Then PI3K AKT signaling becomes impaired in obesity and chronic hyperinsulinemia. These 4 points. So yes, insulin signaling becomes blunted. So that here is the key concept. The impairment is not uniform, it is selective. In the liver, the anti-gluconeogenic arm becomes resistant first. The first in the liver, gluconeogenesis should have been arrested because there is a glucose and insulin has entered into the system, AKT, and they should have been there should not be any new glucose formation, but now what has happened, that arms becomes resistant first. So AKT fails to fully suppress FOXO. Glucose production continues and fasting glucose rises. This is the first change, the first change of the insulin resistance. However, the lipogenic arm, the second arm, it remains selectively present. mTOR C1 activation and SREBP1C activation, they continue. So liver continues making fat, continues making fat. This creates the metabolic paradox. High glucose and high triglycerides at the same time. And how does this lipogenesis survive? If you think at the next level, if you want to think that how does it happen, there are actually four main reasons of this effect why lipogenesis is surviving. First one will be hyperinsulinemia compensation. So even if signaling efficiency, like insulin signaling at receptor efficiency, they are blunted, it is dropped by 50%. So just estimate how much insulin will be increased to produce the same effect. Is it 50% or no? The insulin levels may increase 3 to 5 folds. Insulin receptor sensitivity is reduced to 50%. So it's not mathematical that body will double the insulin for the same effect. Insulin levels will increase 3 to 5 fold. So the net signaling reach in mTOR may still be sufficient. So resistance plus high insulin does not equal zero signaling. Understand that. Second point is hyperinsulinemia compensation. Second point would be mTOR has multiple inputs. It's not only mTOR C1. You think it's only insulin dependent? Answer is no. It is also activated by amino acids, especially leucine is one of those amino acids which actually activates mTOR C1 very beautifully. Leucine. Energy surplus, then if you are taking a lot of calories, then ER stress we talked about, then inflammatory signaling. So all these four things, ER stress, inflammatory signaling, energy surplus or amino acid, a couple of amino acids, especially leucine, they can also signal and initiate this mTOR pathways. So nutrient access itself keeps the mTOR active in these patients selectively. Third would be glucose itself, not forget about insulin, glucose itself drives lipogenesis. High glucose activates CHREBP. So even when insulin signaling is impaired, hyperglycemia independently stimulates fat synthesis. Fourth one would be different signaling thresholds. So suppressing gluconeogenesis requires a very, very strong AKT activity. So activating lipogenesis requires very less AKT activity. So when signaling weakens, glucose control fails. First, fat synthesis persists long. Clinical implications, let us understand why patients with insulin resistance will have fatty liver, elevated triglycerides, visceral obesity, elevated fasting glucose, and increased cancer risk. So insulin resistance does not mean absence of insulin signaling, it means dysregulated, imbalanced signaling, and in fact, many tissues still experience chronic anabolic stimulation. Okay, so in our functional and longevity perspective, this chronic mTOR activation, what does this mean? Chronic mTOR activation, it means what does it do? It reduces autophagy. It promotes lipogenesis, it increases oxidative stress, and it drives cellular aging. So meanwhile, AMP kinase activity is suppressed. So metabolically, the system is simultaneously energy overloaded and metabolically inflexible. So this imbalance is central to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. diabetes, type 2 diabetes, PCOS, and cardiovascular disease and cancer biology. Hope you have understood that selective insulin resistance means the liver becomes resistant to insulin's glucose suppressing effects but remains sensitive to insulin's fat promoting effects. And that is why hyperglycemia and hypertriglyceridemia, they coexist. Understanding this concept changes how we think about hyperinsulinemia, dietary excess, metabolic therapy, mTOR modulation, and cancer prevention. So insulin is not a complete shutdown of signaling insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is not a complete shutdown of signaling. It is a misdirection of signaling, and that misdirection is what drives modern metabolic disease.